Welcome to Clocking In, my Hurricane Cobra build. So today you have a special treat in store. We are going to be building the front suspension on my car. The special treat is that I'm actually going to take video of the entire process of me assembling one of the sides of the front suspension. Some issues came up. It'll be an interesting watch. I did resolve the issues and everything ended up great with the front suspension. But let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, we have set out all the parts to do the front suspension, which is the next step of the project. So of course we have the instructions here. We have the spindles. That's the center part of the suspension that the brakes and the wheels are going to bolt to. Here we've got the upper control arm cross brace that mounts to the frame, and then the upper control arms mount to that. Here we've got a bag, so then we've got some hardware. We've got the heim joints. We've got tie rod, clevis ends. These are the lower control arms. Those are built by Hurricane, so those will require some assembly as well. On each end of these control arms, one of these heim joints is going to go in there. And then here we're going to be using a ball joint like that. That is going to screw into here. And then that bolts to the frame. And then of course we've got our coilover shocks here with the springs there. Those need to be assembled. So a little bit of assembly to do, and I'll be right back. Okay, here we are. We're going to work on the front suspension. Left side, driver's side, I believe. So I have prepared some parts. Took about 45 minutes. Stock together. I obviously laid out all of the fasteners and the hardware, put the suspension together, the control arm, these heim joints, swedge tubes, this upper ball joint receptacle, and then inside it is screwed a ball joint. So that is basically the lower suspension arm. This is a piece that is made and powder coated by Hurricane manufacturer. I put in the ball joint in the bottom, and this is basically your lower suspension. This is the stock that I've assembled. Just put the spring on there. It doesn't require a spring compressor. It's a great system. And special treat, you get to watch me actually working. Oh, and the last piece here is the spindle. Of course, the spindle is what will connect all of those different pieces together to create a way for the car to have a left front wheel. Here we go. Here, read through them, and here some of this stuff is what I've already done. So the first thing we need to do is attach this upper control arm bracket. We'll call it symmetrical. This is a second. Install the lower control arms first. So Sometimes you'll see me using a hammer. Create the holes in the frame. Create the holes to fit the bolts. The powder coater comes around and sprays powder. The holes might become a little bit tight for the bolt. So if it's real tight, you want to actually use something to grind it out sand it out. It may not take very much. Otherwise, if it seems like it'll go with a little bit of force, you can just use. So the way these work is that you've got bolts, you have a spacer. Here I have two hammers. I'm going to first go ahead and just push this bolt through. Okay, so that one, it's tight on the shank of the bolt, but it went in. So I'm not going to need to use any sort of grinding technique to this one. Out. You don't want to hammer on threads. On the end of the nut a little bit. Working on things. You know, you start these little projects and you think you know what you need as far as tools, and reality strikes. Grab another tool. Okay, very good. All right, so as I look here at the A-arm, the two points don't really line up in the center. So it almost looks as though these are not parallel, but this is moving inward a little bit, right? And so these spacers that you're supposed to use are not going to fit because one of these joints and the other one is not centered. If this one's centered, this spacer is not centered, in this case, something is up. So my thought at this point is to take a break, take a closer look here. Okay. Parallel, so I would have to put this in some sort of a press to press it apart a little bit, but geometry, it may not. Chances are it won't. Anyway, we're just going to go ahead and move on to the rest of the suspension, and I will deal with this later. So the next step is full arm cross shaft. According to the pictures, very long bolts. Washers are needed here. Long bolts or the not so long bolts. Okay. bit. So here again, we've got the powder coating issue. We're just gonna hit these with a, this is a flooring hammer. It's meant to use okay, so here we use a couple washers. Eye lock nuts. We're not going to mess around with tools and tightening things. We're just going to put it together. And control arm works. Like that. How pretty. So guided bolts. This comes to the back of the car. The instruction actually shows the car side of the car. Wide bolts with this unit here. Sudden, with all of these crazy parts, tubes, these heim joints, you've got here, you've got that piece here. All of a sudden, you put it together, and you have a front control arm, and it is adjustable. You move these tubes, and this thing goes this way, or it goes this way, or it goes all kinds of ways, depending on how you need to adjust your suspension. So, fully adjustable. Okay, so let's go ahead and put in the knuckle next. Arm. So, for the sake of posterity, I'm going to go ahead and put the control arm in, even though there's some issue with the way it's shaped. It's going to be temporary, but it's going to help me finish this video and show how to put a piece of suspension. side here. Just forearm in first. So, spacers. Okay, so there we go. Okay. So now that lower control arm is mounted, and it doesn't line up in terms of spacers, that may not actually matter for the actual suspension. Series of spacers that are the side, or put this and spread it apart a little bit. It seems to be a little bit too narrow for the mounts that are on the frame. So moving forward. So now we've got an upper control arm, lower control arm. So the nice thing about this is, even though I might need to work with it, I might need to take it off completely, or if I decide to just use the right spacers that would connect the arm that it's at. But we're going to go ahead and put this together because we're trying to make an informational video here. So now it's probably starting to look like a suspension to you guys. Just like that. Boom. Oh, there we go. We got a lovely A-arm suspension. Like that one. Down. Yeah. This thing is adjustable. Four control arms here. Arms here and here. You could by differentially changing these adjustments. So the last part of this installation would be putting in this shock. Going something like this. So bolt coming from the bottom here. It's going to later. And make this thing work. spacers. Mock up. So here we've got some spacers that you put in. Like, go ahead and, for the educational purpose, okay, so the reason I was really hammering on that is because of the powder coating inside that hole. So I've mocked up the suspension. There's a couple of problems. Got to deal with that. Not a big deal. But I wanted to show you second per second what it's like to try to put a suspension together. So at this point, once I get the bolts on, everything worked out, that kind of thing, it's just a matter of adding your steering rack, attaching the ball joints here, and then you've got an axle to put your brakes on, your hub, and of course your front wheel. So I hope you enjoyed me trying to put together this front suspension. There's been a couple of snags here. Was not expected, but we'll be able to work those things out and get this thing all together. Okay, here we have the completed front end. There was a couple issues that we had to work out. Turns out on these cars, when they make the A-arm, the lower control arm there can be some spreading of these legs here because of the heat during the welding process, and a number of different Hurricane owners have had that problem. So in order to get those to ride right in the middle of the brackets, which may or may not be important, I went ahead and squeezed those apart using a jack. And the other side was in spec, and then the rest of it all came together as planned. So there is the front suspension all complete. Clocking out. Okay, so inside those lovely Wilwood boxes were a bunch of wonderful brake components. This is essentially what comes in the box. So let's see here, what's most identifiable is that piece and that piece go together to make a brake rotor. Here you have the lightweight caliper. That's a 2-piston caliper. Actually, is it a 4-piston? It's a 4-piston caliper, excuse me. This is the hub. Here we have the caliper bracket. So this mounts to the car, and then the caliper mounts to the bracket. We've got the bearings and different hardware and seals. Over here we have the Wilwood brake pads, and of course a beautiful box of brand new hardware, top quality stuff. So we're going to go ahead and put some front brakes together.